Have you ever stopped to think about what government actually is? For centuries, the job of a ruler seemed pretty simple. Own the land, make the laws, defend the territory. But then something shifted. A quiet revolution happened that completely changed the art of ruling. The king, this figure of almost divine power, slowly started looking a lot more like a modern CEO, managing a vast, complicated enterprise. So how on earth did that happen?
Right, that's the big question for us today. How did we get from a world where a king's word was law to our world, a world of tangled economic policies, public health strategies, and social programs? How was the entire playbook for ruling so completely rewritten? That's the mystery we're going to dig into.
And here's our roadmap. We're going to break the story down into 5 parts. First, we'll look at the old school model, what we're calling the ruler's law. Then we'll see how a totally new art of ruling started to take shape. After that, we'll get into what it means to govern men and things and discover the game-changing role of population. And finally, we'll see how this revolution from centuries ago completely defines the world of government we all live in right now.
Okay, let's start at the very beginning, with the model of power that ran the show for centuries: sovereignty. This is the world you think of when you imagine kings, emperors, and princes.
So, under sovereignty, the power structure was super clear. The ruler, the sovereign, was basically outside and above everything. They weren't part of the kingdom, they owned it, you know? It's like the kingdom was their property, something they were connected to by birthright or because they conquered it. They weren't just in the system, they were its absolute owner.
So what was the king's job really? Well, it was pretty straightforward. Protect your property and your claim to it. The main tool was the law, and the main goal was getting people to obey it. And here's the crucial part. The whole point of sovereignty was, well, sovereignty. The goal of ruling was simply to keep ruling. If your subjects obeyed you, you were a success. That's it.
But then, around the 16th century, this old model started showing some serious cracks. The world was getting way more complicated, and people started asking if there wasn't a better way to do things, a new instruction manual for how to rule.
You had feudalism just falling apart, the Reformation was challenging all the old religious authorities. It was a chaotic time. And all this chaos led to new questions. How do you govern yourself? How do you properly govern a family? And the big one, how do you actually govern a whole state? The old method of just laying down the law wasn't cutting it anymore. People needed a new, more practical art of government.
And this little chart really gets to the heart of the change. On the one hand, you have sovereignty, which has one main tool, the law. But this new art of government, it uses all sorts of different tactics. And the goal? It's not just obedience anymore. Now it's about achieving practical results, what they called convenient ends. Things like, making sure the city has enough food or boosting trade. And the focus? It shifts from just defending a piece of land to actively managing this whole complicated web of people and resources.
Now, to really get this new art of government, you have to understand what the word economy meant back then. It wasn't about the stock market or GDP, it meant the careful, wise management of a household, like a father running his family. And that was the big idea here. What if you could take that model of household management and scale it up to run the entire state? What if you could run a kingdom like a perfectly managed home? This idea of managing a big, complex system can feel a little abstract. So thinkers at the time came up with a really powerful analogy to make it all make sense. Governing a state is a lot like being the captain of a ship.
And this quote from a guy named Guillaume de la Perrière way back in 1567 just nails it. Notice what he says. He doesn't talk about laws or territory. He says government is about the right disposition of things. So, what in the world are things?
Well, things isn't just stuff, like treasure or land. It's the whole ecosystem. It's the people and how they relate to the world around them. Their customs, their resources, their wealth, and even how they deal with unpredictable stuff, like a famine or a disease outbreak. This new art of government was about managing this entire dynamic web.
And that's where the ship analogy is so perfect. A captain doesn't just own the deck of the ship, right? No, they have to manage the sailors, protect the ship and its cargo, and skillfully navigate through bad weather and unexpected dangers. And what's the ultimate goal? It's not just to keep floating, it's to get to a specific, useful destination, a convenient port. And that, right there, is the new art of government in a nutshell.
So this new way of thinking about government bubbled along for a couple of hundred years. But it was in the 18th century that a huge discovery happened that unlocked its full power and really created the modern world we live in.
The big game changer was the birth of statistics. For the very first time, rulers could see population not just as a bunch of people or families, but as its own thing, a new object with its own predictable patterns, birth rates, death rates, economic cycles. It became clear you couldn't manage a whole population like you manage a single household. It was a completely different beast.
And with that discovery, the entire purpose of government flipped on its head. The population itself became the new finish line. The state's main job was now to make sure the population was healthy, wealthy, and living long lives. The success of a government was suddenly measured by the well-being of its people.
And this is where all the pieces get rearranged. The family isn't the model for government anymore. It becomes a tool used by the government to manage the population. It becomes a way to roll out public health campaigns or influence what people buy. So the population becomes this fascinating dual thing. It's the subject that has needs, but it's also the object that needs to be carefully managed. So with this new focus on managing the people, their land, and their money, a whole new science had to be born: political economy. This became the essential knowledge for modern government, the science of how to captain that incredibly complex ship of state.
Okay, so let's tie this all together. What is the legacy of this quiet, centuries-long revolution in how we think about power? Well, it's pretty simple. It's the world we live in right now.
You can see this really clear evolution. In the Middle Ages, you had a state of justice that was all about law. Then came the administrative state, which was about rules and regulations. But from the 18th century on, we've been living in a governmental state, one that is mostly concerned with the security and the welfare of its population.
The philosopher Michel Foucault actually gave a name to this whole modern system of power: governmentality. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it basically describes this whole setup: the institutions, the data, the tactics that are all aimed at managing the population, using political economy as its main knowledge base, with the #1 goal being security and prosperity.
And this brings us to one last, really challenging idea from Foucault. He suggests that maybe we focus too much on the state as this one big, powerful thing. He makes you wonder, what if the real power isn't in that one single place, but is actually spread all over?
And that's the final thought I want to leave you with. What if the state is just a convenient label we put on something way more complex? Is it possible that the real power shaping our lives today isn't found in some grand law handed down by a sovereign, but in the thousands of little, subtle, calculated tactics of government that manage our health, our money, and our well-being every single day? Something to think about.